So the next possible explanation is that people are just ready for a change. I had a professor in university who had a theory about the younger George Bush, that people were tired of being lied to by well-educated politicians. And if you think back, Obama obviously came since Bush, but he went to Harvard and he speaks extremely thoughtfully, and to some so thoughtfully that it's annoying. Before Bush Jr. was Clinton, who was a Rhodes Scholar and supposedly has legendary charisma. Bush's father, Bush, was a career politician. He was a two-term vice president of the United States, and he was also head of the CIA at one point. Ronald Reagan was a Hollywood actor. Nixon was a career politician. He was a two-term vice president, just like the first Bush. Johnson was a career politician. And Kennedy, of course, was not only was he supposedly incredibly charismatic, but he was also from the Eastern establishment that used to matter a lot more in U.S. politics. So the U.S. president has more often than not been a polished, educated politician. Ford never actually won an election, so he doesn't count. And Carter was deemed unfit to handle the job of president in when it came down to it. So those two guys, we can kind of, see how people react to them. And for the most part, it's been career politicians. And then Bush was deemed to, be good at handling the crises of his time, though obviously now we can look back and see Carter very differently than they did at the time. We can see Bush very differently than people did at the time because of things like ISIS. But the point is that through the last 56 years, everyman types of presidents have been in power for 14 years out of the 56 years. And though Trump is not an everyman, I think a lot of people think he is an everyman. And maybe it's because Trump has been assessed at speaking at times at a fourth grade level. Or it could be that he appears to be more honest than other politicians because he doesn't think before he speaks. Even though Trump is university educated, he doesn't sound like he's university educated. I mean, and Bush, it's worth noting that the younger Bush didn't sound like he went to Yale and Harvard either. But I don't think this really explains it either, because Trump is very rich. He's not a regular guy. It's worth noting that Bush was not a regular guy either. But Bush had a ranch at least and could clean up brush. Trump doesn't do that. And I want to talk about my former mayor, Rob Ford, for a minute. I'm from Toronto. He's been sort of pointed out by some as an antecedent to Donald Trump. He was born into money, but he convinced enough people in Toronto that he was a regular guy and not a member of the downtown elites, that people voted for him as like an outsider and as a regular guy, despite the fact that he was way better off than all of them, and the business that he supposedly had success with was his parents. But there was a lot of history in Toronto that backed Ford's success, that allowed, I think, people to convince themselves that a man born into money was an average guy. And certainly Ford's personality, the way he spoke, and his lack of formal education helped. But there was so much resentment in the outer boroughs of Toronto. Toronto's a geographically big city, that I think the resentment was looking to jump onto someone. And in Toronto, we had a previous mayor named Mel Lastman, who was briefly famous during SARS, who was a furniture salesman, who I think was somewhat similar in tone anyway, to Ford, and certainly in the everyman image. And I think Ford maybe has a lot more in common with Lastman than he does with Trump, in part because Trump is so much more rich than Rob Ford. So another theory is that Trump started out being just a troll, the internet troll, that he was just saying whatever he wanted, kind of like Bulworth. And he had no intention of actually seriously running for president. And this was a protest candidacy. His former director of communications for one of his PACs actually claimed that this was his plan before he started having a lot of success. I think it's a little simplistic, and that's why it's appealing. And maybe initially he was saying stuff to get attention, but I don't know why this explains he's popular. Explains maybe why he started doing what he was doing before he got popular, but doesn't explain why it's appealing to people. Trolls generally aren't appealing to people. There's a small group that find them funny, but is that really enough to explain why he could possibly be elected president? I don't think so. So I think something else is happening. So then there's the possibility that this is all the fault of the media. And when I say that, I mean the mainstream television media that's on 24 hours a day. I don't necessarily mean newspapers or the radio, the talk radio maybe. And I don't mean all the media, just TV principally. Last fall, the television media were giving him more coverage than any other candidate, including more time than every person running for the Democratic Party nomination, even though he wasn't anywhere near as popular as he is now. And so I see the appeal of this. But the thing is that people have to want to watch this stuff, right? Like, the media can't just force us to vote for somebody. So I'm pretty sure that this isn't the cause. Because you get a chicken and the egg question, right? Is society responsible for the awfulness that is on TV, or is TV just making us idiots? And I get in this argument with people all the time. You know, there's a popular memed post out there now saying, like, reality TV caused Donald Trump. And I don't buy it, because, you know, people say that stuff about video games and violence. They say violence is caused by video games. The thing is, violence predates video games and has been going down since video games existed. So there's no way that video games cause violence. And I think the same thing is true here. There's been terrible stuff on American television for a long time, and a lot of it predates reality TV. And also some of the things that are some of the views that Trump supporters have and that Trump is appealing to predate not only reality TV, but TV itself. They predate radio. So, such as nativism and isolationism. These things are not new. They can't be caused by the media. So something else is going on. Another theory is that this is a unique cultural moment and it will pass. White, poor, not so poor, but poorer than they think they should be. Americans are angry and unhappy. And they've been watching Trump on The Apprentice and at wrestling events, and he's just the vessel they need for the rage. This rage was expressed before in the candidacies of Huckabee and Santorum. And these are just a fringe group, and they have more influence because Trump is more famous than Huckabee and Santorum. And, you know, as a result, he has more appeal because neither of those guys were on The Apprentice, and neither of those guys wrote The Art of the Deal. And supposedly this will go away when the demographics shift. I feel like that made a lot more sense last year. And, you know, when he was less popular. And I'd just like to say that this is also the country that elected George Bush twice. And Trump makes Bush look like a normal presidential candidate. But this is a man who, Bush is a man who invaded a country that had nothing to do with a terrorist attack on U.S. soil and set in motion all of these things that the world is currently dealing with. This war on terror that has caused, as we shouldn't be surprised, but it has caused more terror in the world, so it seems, so we perceive at least, than existed at 9/11, and has created essentially an army of terrorists in Syria as a result. This man was elected president twice. He was elected the second time after he invaded Iraq. After. So he was elected with more votes, I believe, the second time. These things are not fringe views necessarily. The support for things that don't make sense. I know Bush and Trump are not similar in policy, to the extent you can say Trump has policies, but they are similar in their disregard for reality. And so in that sense, their appeal may be similar. Maybe. They may not be. Anyway, I'm not sure that thinking that this is a fringe, that Trump is supported by a lunatic fringe, and there explains it all how he's where he is today. So some people feel that Trump and general Republican incoherence are both reactions to 8 years of Obama. And when we say Obama, we mean a black man as president of the U.S., a man that some people insist on believing was not born in the United States, including Trump being a very popular promoter of that, or who believe he's a Muslim, which means what, I don't know, but who believe he's a Muslim, and also, or maybe believe both of those things together. The idea is the theory that this black man is so offensive to certain people in the U.S. that they can't even look at his policies, some of which are basically Republican, at least in actual, in effect, eventually. I mean, Obamacare is inspired by, in part, things that were implemented by Mitt Romney in Massachusetts. And certainly the foreign policy of Obama could hardly be called, or could hardly be considered, peaceful. So to sort of sum up what I was saying there, evidence for the theory includes the extreme reactions to some of Obama's actual policies, many of which are based in compromise with Republican ideas, and in some cases were even based on policy ideas from the Republicans. The few months ago, when the Republicans were utterly unwilling to meet with the Obama nominee for the Supreme Court because there was an election coming, seems to support the theory. But though I think this is at least part of the issue, I have a few problems accepting this is the dominant explanation. For one thing, racist as some people are, I'm not sure the entire Republican Party is so subconsciously racist as to be doing this. Is the 21st century and racism in the U.S. has changed and mutated in many ways? Is it so utterly rampant to cause the GOP to commit political suicide like they appeared to be doing not that long ago before Trump actually closed on Hillary in the polls? I don't know. The rampant police shootings of black Americans might suggest that. I don't know. I'm not sure what the answer to that question is. The second issue I have is the rampant partisanship that is destroying the U.S. government is a lot older than Obama. It's been going on for a long time, since I think late 60s probably, maybe even earlier. And that's worth thinking about, because I don't think it needed just a black man to come along to make it worse. It was already like that. Another theory is that there's a portion of the electorate that has a preference for fascism.